All right, so we're going to start with the muscular system. All right, so talk a little bit about characteristics of muscles. Look at the cells in both skeletal muscle and smooth muscle. They are very long cells. They're not round. They're long and thin. Also, you may see the term skeletal muscle fiber or smooth muscle fiber. Anytime we say fiber, it means the same thing as muscle cell. Okay? So don't get confused by that. They are actually the same thing. So how do muscles contract and shorten? Well, remember structures related or functions related to structure. So they are microfilaments in your muscles and they move, and that allows for contraction. Also, you'll see some terms in here. If you see myo or mys, we're talking about muscle. See sarco, talking about flesh. So you'll see sarco and myo and mys with some of the vocabulary words in this chapter. But those are all words that have to do with muscle. All right. So basically all the movement in your body is because of some muscles, okay? So they account for all your body movement. And that could be from one of three different types of muscles. It could be skeletal muscle, it could be cardiac muscle, it could be smooth muscle. Okay, but those are the three types of muscle. All right, this gives you a bit of an overview here. You can describe in terms of where you find them. Skeletal muscles are attached to bones. In some cases, attached to skin. In the case of the face. Cardiac muscles only found in the heart and the walls of the heart. Smooth muscle is basically found in the walls of hollow organs. Okay, and those could include blood vessels. So make sure you understand the walls of the blood vessels have smooth muscle. The walls of the heart have cardiac muscle. But it could also be like small intestine, stomach. Those are also have smooth muscle. We also talk about muscle in terms of cells and their shape and appearance. So if the cells are long and cylindrical, like each essentially row is a cell with many nuclei per cell, and these little vertical lines are striations, that's skeletal muscle. Cardiac muscle also has striations, but the fibers branch, okay? They're not straight. They don't form straight lines across. And you got these dark stained vertical lines called intercalated discs. And that allows cardiac muscle cells to talk to each other. Okay. Now, you see no striations and the cells have one nuclei per cell. These are smooth muscle cells. Cardiac muscle also has one nuclei per cell. So that's the overview. Okay, a little more detail on smooth muscle. No striations. Cells are spindle shaped, which basically means they're thin and pointy on each end. One nuclei per cell. Smooth muscle is involuntary. You don't have to think to move food through your digestive system. All right, you don't have to think to make your blood vessels pump blood. Again, found the walls of your hollow organs. Okay. All right, so you have smooth muscle here. So you have a circular layer, smooth muscle, and you have a longitudinal layer. Okay, fibers run in different directions, but it is smooth muscle. But again, this is a hollow organ. Okay, so it has smooth muscle. in the wall. Cardiac muscle, striated, 1 nuclei per cell. The cells branch, so they're not completely straight left to right. The cells connect to each other and communicate with each other via the intercalated disc. So if you see intercalated disc, you know it's a cardiac muscle cell. It's also involuntary. You don't have to think to make your heart beat, fortunately. And only found in the walls of the heart. Okay, your skeletal muscle, attached to the bones via tendons, multiple nuclei per cell. These cells have the bands, they are striated, they are voluntary, so you typically have to think to make your muscles move. Okay. All right, so before we get into functions of skeletal muscle, let's take a minute and you can talk to your partner about similarities and differences between the 3 types of muscle tissue. And you can do this at home as well if you're watching at home. Okay, functions of the skeletal muscle. Helps you move, right? Produces movement. Helps you maintain your posture. If you didn't have your muscles, your bones would just kind of flop around. Your muscles actually help you to stand up straight, sit up straight, you know, tuck in your belly. Which
would be your skeletal.
Well, it is your skeletal muscle, right? So, stabilizing the joints, okay, keeps the joints stable. Also, skeletal muscle, when it moves, it generates heat, okay, makes you warmer. Okay, so skeletal muscle actually has connective tissue around it. It has layers. So enclosing one muscle fiber, you have endomysium. Remember, mice means muscle. Okay, and endo is inner. Perimysium will wrap around a bundle of muscle fibers called a fascicle. And epimysium will cover the whole skeletal muscle. Remember, epi is outer. Now, on the outside of the epimysium, sometimes you'll also find what we call fascia. Okay. But definitely know which endo, peri, and epi, or what do they surround? Okay, know that. Like for the endomysium, perimysium, epimysium, know what those structures surround. Well, in a sense, your skeletal muscle fibers, in a sense, have everything wrapped around them. But usually, if I'm asking that question, I'm going to be specific. Like, what is the specific thing that's surrounding this? So, you know, I doubt I would ask the question the way that would make it multiple layers. You'd be asking for a specific layer. Okay, here's a picture of it. So here's one skeletal muscle fiber cell. So, and in between each of the muscle fiber cells is endomysium. Okay, so it surrounds each muscle fiber. Now, this whole group, just like this whole group, is a fascicle. And surrounding the fascicle is going to be perimysium. Now, collection of fascicles makes a whole muscle. So it's surrounded by it's surrounded by epimysium. So here's your perimysium surrounding a fascicle, and your epimysium surrounding the whole muscle. So endomysium surrounds the fibers, or in between the fibers. perimysium surrounds the basically perimysium surrounding the fascicle. You have multiple fascicles that make up a whole muscle surrounded by epimysium. So endo, peri, epi. But if it says surrounding the whole muscle, it's epimysium. If it says surrounding a fascicle, it's perimysium. If it says surrounding a muscle fiber cell or in between muscle fibers, it's endomysium. Okay, your epimysium will blend in with connective tissue to form some sort of attachment. So you can have a tendon, which is more like a cord made up of collagen fibers. It can go across a joint. They're very tough and small. All right, so in your tendons, usually are connecting that muscle to bone. You also have sometimes we'll see aponeuroses. Okay, and these are more like sheets. Okay, and these attach muscles in a way that's more indirect to some cartilage, some bone, or some other connective tissue. Okay, but it forms more of a sheet. All right, microscopic anatomy. So we're not done with microscopic anatomy. We focused mostly on it in the previous chapter, but you'll see some cases of it in each chapter. So remember, sarco is one of those root words dealing with muscle. So the sarcolemma is what we call the plasma membrane or cell membrane in a muscle cell or a muscle fiber. So lemma has to do with the plasma membrane. Sarco, so it's a muscle cell plasma membrane. Myofibrils are considered organelles in your muscle cells, and they are essentially like you have a whole fiber, but these are smaller than that, so they're called fibrils. So you have what we call light bands or I bands, dark bands or A bands, and they give the muscle its striped appearance. Okay, so to help me remember the light bands and the letters and the names, the second letter in light, see if I can, there. Second letter in light is I. So light bands are also called I bands. Second letter in dark is A. Those are the A bands, okay? And you see these two bands together, it makes the muscle look striped. All right, here's your sarcolemma here. It's a plasma membrane surrounding the muscle fiber or muscle cell. Okay, in each, essentially, inside of a muscle fiber cell, you have these myofibrils, okay? And then you have dark bands and light bands, okay? A bands and I bands. So here you go, it shows you there. I band, light band, thin microfilament or thin filaments. In the middle of an I band, you'll have what we call a Z disc. And we'll show you what that looks like. So, and for the A band or dark band, contains what we call the entire length of the thick filaments. So the thick filaments are associated with the A band. You'll also see an area that's considered called an H zone, and we'll see why, because it looks like an H. and it's the lighter area in the center. And you also see in the center of the H zone is a line we call the M line. And it's in the middle, M line. All right, here's your Z disc with your thin filaments, and call it a Z disc because if you're creative, you can see it zigzags, right? C line. All right, that's the center of your thin filaments. Now, in the thick filaments, center of your thick filaments, you get what we call an H zone, okay? So that's this area. Now, this line in the middle of the H zone is considered an M line. Okay. And so another thing they want you to know here, the thin filaments, we call them actin. The thick filaments are called myosin. These are names for different fibers. And so for me, to help me remember, so actin, I take like the TIN and actin, it kind of sounds like thin. So it's actin fibers, or actin is the thin filaments. Myosin's a bigger word, so it's the thick filaments, okay? All right, so your I band essentially is it's the light area, but it's basically the area where all you have are thin filaments, okay? And that's why it's lighter. Now, the A band is where you have the thick filaments from one end to the other. That's what makes it dark. Okay, more microscopic anatomy. So the contractile unit, or what's actually doing the contracting on a small microscopic level, in a muscle fiber is called a sarcomere. You're seeing sarco again. So again, this sarcomere is organized with the actin and myosin. Remember we just said actin is the thin filaments, myosin's the thick filaments. All right, so myosin's a protein, again, makes up the thick filaments, has what we call ATP-ACE enzymes. Remember, anytime you see ASE, it's an enzyme. And so muscle contracting is going to require ATP. Okay, so you need a way to use it to make muscle contract. Myosin has a structure on it that we call myosin head. And the heads are called cross bridges when they link to thin filaments during muscle contraction. Okay. All right, so the thin filaments, these are your actin filaments. And it's called that because it's made up of a protein called actin. And the actin is anchored, remember that's the light area is anchored to the Z disc. So Z disc is in the middle of the light band, or the I band. So at rest, you have an area within the A band, which is the dark band, right? And it does not have any actin filaments overlapping. And that's where your H zone is. All right, so we'll get into this a little more later. All right, so again, here the yellow. All right, then you have the blue. So the blue parts, the blue is your actin. So this is actin. The red is your myosin. Remember, the Z-disc is in the middle of the actin molecule. M line's in the middle of the myosin molecule. Okay. So you can see here, this is the H band because there are no thin filaments in this little space. Okay. That's what makes up the H zone. All right, another microscopic structure you need to know is the sarcoplasmic reticulum. So sarcoplasmic reticulum is just a way of saying smooth endoplasmic reticulum in a muscle cell. Okay, smooth endoplasmic reticulum in a muscle cell. And it's specialized, so what's its role that's unique to muscle cells? So it's going to store calcium and release it when you need it. And calcium is used in muscle contraction. And it surrounds the myofibril, okay? So it's there when the myofibril needs calcium. Okay, so let's pause there. Talk to your partner about what you learned about light bands, dark bands, parts of muscle contraction, parts of muscle cells, skeletal muscle fibers. You can do this at home as well. So let's talk about characteristics of contraction and stimulating skeletal muscle cells. So one property is called irritability, also known as responsiveness. This means it can receive a stimulus and respond to it. Okay, contractility. Okay, vocabulary word, which just means that muscle can shorten if there's an adequate stimulus. Okay, keyword there is adequate. Extensibility. This means that the muscle cells can be stretched. They can be extended, right? And elasticity means that they can recoil and go back to their original length after they've been stretched. Okay. All right, so nerve stimulus. So in order for muscles to contract, they have to be stimulated by a neuron. Okay. So a motor unit is basically take one motor neuron and all of the skeletal muscle cells that get stimulated by that neuron. We call that a motor unit. Okay. All right, so here's a way of looking at it. So you have a nerve that basically comes away from the spinal cord. Here's one nerve, and then it innervates this muscle fiber and that one. So this muscle fiber, that one, and this nerve is motor unit 1. This nerve innervates this one, and this one. So all 3 fibers in the nerve are the second motor unit. Okay. All right, and this is what it looks like under a slide. So you can kind of see neuron branching off. And you have these terminals of the axons. Remember, axons send the signal, right? So this is the axon terminal is the ending of the axon. Okay, neuromuscular junction. So neuromuscular junction basically just means where the axon terminal and that motor neuron meets the sarcolemma or the plasma membrane of a muscle. Okay, so if this is a axon terminal, this is a sarcolemma cell membrane of a muscle tissue, it's where they meet. Okay, that junction where they meet is a neuromuscular junction. Neuro for neuron, muscular for muscle tissue. Now, a neurotransmitter is some chemical that the nerve releases once it arrives and you get a nerve impulse at the terminal of the axon. Okay, it's a chemical that axon releases and transmits a signal, so it's a neurotransmitter. Now, a classic neurotransmitter that stimulates skeletal muscle tissue is acetylcholine, okay, abbreviated ACH. All right, the synaptic cleft. So you have the neuromuscular junction, which is basically a kind of a bigger area. Now the small gap between the nerve and the muscle is the synaptic cleft, okay? So actually the nerve and the muscle don't actually touch, okay? There's interstitial or extracellular fluid in that space. And the axon releases its neurotransmitter and it floats across the cleft and is picked up or noticed by receptors on your muscle. All right, so we'll do this part. Let's see. Next time we'll start with transmission of the nerve muscle impulse. So what I'd like you to do now is do your exit tickets. And if you're at home, you can still do your clear point and muddy point in the discussion area and turn that in. You can also talk about the action potential.